or I need you to deplane immediately. The words sliced through the cabin like a knife, silencing the casual chatter of passengers settling in for their flight. Captain Richard Davenport stands rigid in the aisle, his face taut with barely contained anger as he points toward the exit. The object of his fury, Master Sergeant James Wilson, a decorated Air Force veteran with 22 years of service, still in his dress blues following his daughter's college graduation ceremony, looks up in stunned disbelief. 6 rows ahead, Diane Rodriguez, a 58-year-old emergency room nurse returning from a medical conference, instinctively reaches for her phone. After 30 years in the ER, she's developed a sixth sense for trouble, and something about the captain's stance. The rigid authority, the barely contained emotion, triggers that same instinct that has saved countless lives under her care. Her weathered hands, bearing the fine lines of decades of scrubbing in, move with practiced efficiency as she opens her camera app. "What's happening?" whispers her seatmate, Dr. Howard Greenfield, a cardiologist she's known for 20 years through conferences and consultations. His silver-rimmed glasses catch the overhead light as he leans toward her. "Not sure," Diane murmurs, "but nothing good. That's a military man he's confronting." "Excuse me." James manages, his voice steady despite the shock rippling through him. The gold insignia on his uniform catches the overhead light, a stark reminder of his decades of service to the same country whose flag is emblazoned on the pilot's lapel. Marcus Johnson, a retired Army colonel seated in 8C, feels his pulse quicken. At 67, with silver at his temples and 2 tours in Vietnam behind him, he recognizes the dangerous collision of authority and injustice unfolding before him. He had noticed the master sergeant when boarding, a habit formed over 40 years of military service, automatically registering uniforms, ranks, decorations. Johnson's arthritis-stiffened fingers grip the armrest as he leans forward, straining to hear every word. "You heard me. I won't repeat myself." The captain's voice rises just enough for the surrounding passengers to hear every syllable. "Either you leave this aircraft voluntarily, or I'll have security remove you." A woman 3 rows back gasps audibly. Smartphones emerge from pockets and purses, their cameras already recording. 19-year-old Zoe Chen, headed home from her freshman year at college, begins a live stream with trembling fingers. "I'm on flight 2317 to Atlanta, and you guys won't believe what's happening right now," she whispers urgently into her phone. "The pilot is trying to kick a black military officer off the plane for absolutely no reason." Behind Zoe, Robert Michaels, a 64-year-old high school principal from Philadelphia's inner city, exchanges a knowing glance with his wife, Patricia. For 35 years, he's guided students through America's complex racial landscape, watching progress and backsliding, hope and disappointment. He recognizes this moment for what it is, another data point in the ongoing American experiment, another test of whether the nation's reality can match its rhetoric. With deliberate calm, he removes his reading glasses and rises slightly in his seat, making himself visible, a silent witness. Across the aisle, Sofia Katsaros, a 70-year-old Greek immigrant who built a successful restaurant chain after arriving in America with nothing but $200 and a family souvlaki recipe, watches with growing indignation. The America that welcomed her in 1978 promised fairness, opportunity, equal treatment under law. Her heavily accented voice rises sharply. "Why you treat military man this way is disgrace." But the real shock comes moments later when Captain Davenport's next words are captured in high-definition clarity on dozens of devices. "Your kind of disrespect has no place on my aircraft." Your kind. 2 words that ignite an instantaneous firestorm throughout the cabin. Within minutes, the video will be streaming to millions. Within hours, the airline CEO will be facing the most significant crisis of his career. Within days, America will once again find itself confronting its deepest, most painful divisions. In the cockpit, First Officer Sandra Payton's stomach drops as she hears the captain's words through the cabin monitor. At 34, one of the few black female commercial pilots in the country, she's fought through barriers her entire career, barriers that seemed insurmountable until she simply refused to accept them as such. Her hand hovers over the intercom button, her mind racing through protocols, regulations, and personal risk calculations. Should she intervene? Could she? What would it cost her? The questions flash through her mind in milliseconds, professional training warring with personal identity. In row 22, Kevin Walsh, a 35-year-old social media manager for a major retail brand, recognizes a viral moment unfolding in real time. His corporate-trained instincts immediately identify the reputational damage spiraling outward. For the airline, for the captain, for the industry. If he were handling this account, Emergency protocols would already be activating, crisis management teams assembling. His fingers move automatically, opening Twitter, the professional in him unable to look away from this textbook PR catastrophe. But to understand how a routine Tuesday afternoon flight from Philadelphia to Atlanta became the epicenter of a national controversy, how a respected pilot with 30 years of spotless service came to make a decision that would forever alter countless lives, including his own. We need to go back to where it all began, 97 minutes earlier, when James Wilson first arrived at Philadelphia International Airport, with no inkling of the storm about to engulf him. The Philadelphia terminal bustles with the familiar choreography of travel, the squeak of luggage wheels against polished floors, gate announcements competing with the ambient hum of conversations, tearful goodbyes, and joyful greetings. James Wilson navigates through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who has spent much of his life in transit. At 54, his posture remains military straight, his uniform pressed to perfection despite the humid June afternoon and the 3-hour graduation ceremony he's just attended. In the terminal's security line, Transportation Security Administration Officer Ray Diaz scans the approaching passengers with the practiced eye of a 20-year veteran. At 59, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, Diaz has seen every type of traveler, every security situation imaginable. His gaze pauses briefly on James Wilson's uniform, automatically registering the ribbons and medals, the visual shorthand of service and sacrifice. Diaz straightens almost imperceptibly, a small gesture of respect from one government servant to another. "Sir," Diaz calls, gesturing to a priority lane, "you can come through here." He offers a small nod of acknowledgement, one that speaks volumes between men of a certain generation. Both understand duty, protocol, the weight of responsibilities carried daily. James returns the nod with a grateful smile. "Appreciate it." "Dad, your shoelace," calls a voice behind him. Alina Wilson, 22 and newly graduated with honors from Penn's School of Engineering, hurries to catch up. Though they share the same deep brown eyes and determined jaw, Alina's face carries her mother's softness, a gentleness that James recognizes with a familiar pang of both joy and grief. Connie has been gone 7 years now, but in moments like these she feels achingly present. James glances down at his Oxford shoe, the lace indeed trailing dangerously across the floor. He sets down his carry-on and kneels to tie it, his movements deliberate. "Still looking out for your old man, I see," he says with a warm smile. His daughter has been his North Star since Connie's passing, the reason to keep moving forward when grief threatened to swallow him whole. He remembers holding Alina's hand at the funeral, her 17-year-old fingers clutching his with surprising strength, whispering, "We've got this, Dad, together." Nearby, Gabriella Morales, a janitor who has maintained this terminal for 15 years, pauses in her work. At 52, with knees that protest each time she kneels to clean a spill and hands roughened by industrial cleaners, she recognizes the tender exchange between father and daughter. Her own daughter, Lucia, now in medical school against all odds, the first in their family to attend college, still calls with similar concern. "Mama, are you taking your blood pressure medication? Are you resting enough?" The parallel touches something in Gabriella, and she smiles softly before returning to her cart, her movements momentarily lighter. "I still can't believe you have to fly back tonight," Alina says, crossing her arms. "We barely had time for lunch after the ceremony." "Duty calls, sweetheart. The base doesn't run itself." He straightens up, adjusting his service cap. "Besides, your brother's driving up from D.C. tomorrow. You two deserve some time together without your old man hovering." "Marcus is bringing Sophia this time. I think it might be serious." Alina's eyes dance with mischief. "You could have met her." "I'll meet her at Christmas. Unless he scares her off before then, he inherited my stellar relationship skills after all." James chuckles, but there's a wistfulness in his eyes that Alina catches immediately. "You know Mom would have been incredibly proud today, right?" she says softly, linking her arm through his as they continue toward security. "She was always proud of you, Alina." From day one, James swallows hard. Engineering scholarship at an Ivy League school, she'd have been insufferable, telling everyone who'd listen about her brilliant daughter. They pause at the security checkpoint, that artificial boundary that has separated so many military families over so many years. James has stood at countless such partings, deploying to Afghanistan while Alina was learning to walk, to Iraq when she lost her first tooth, to countless bases and assignments that took him away from birthdays and school plays and ordinary Tuesday dinners. "Call me when you land," Alina asks, though she knows he always does. "Always." He embraces her tightly, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something fruity and youthful that reminds him she's not his little girl anymore. I love you, kiddo. More than you know. Love you too, Dad. She pulls back, her eyes suspiciously bright. Hey, no one's going to give the man in uniform any trouble, right? First-class upgrade, priority boarding, the works. James laughs. The uniform does have its perks sometimes. If only he knew how catastrophically wrong that prediction would prove to be. Security is indeed expedited for James. The TSA agents nod respectfully at his uniform, and he's through the checkpoint within minutes. With nearly 2 hours until his flight, he finds a quiet corner in a coffee shop near his gate, orders a black coffee, and opens his laptop to review some personnel files that need his attention before tomorrow morning's meeting. 3 tables away, Richard Davenport sips a whiskey neat, his pre-flight ritual for the past 15 years, despite airline regulations prohibiting alcohol consumption within 8 hours of a flight. At 59, he's been flying commercial jets for over 3 decades, and he's developed his own set of rules about what keeps a plane safely in the air. One carefully timed drink to steady his nerves has never affected his performance, or so he tells himself. The 2 men occupy the same space without noticing each other, unwitting players in a drama neither has scripted, but both will be forced to perform. They breathe the same recycled airport air, hear the same gate announcements, exist in parallel universes that will collide with devastating force in less than 2 hours. Davenport closes his tab and stands, adjusting his pilot's uniform with practiced precision. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeves gleam under the fluorescent lights as he gathers his flight bag. He catches his reflection in the bar's mirrored wall and straightens his already straight tie. The face looking back at him is weathered but distinguished, creased by years of responsibility and the strain of recent months. His marriage of 32 years has been disintegrating slowly, then suddenly, his wife Linda's announcement 3 weeks ago that she needed space, coming after years of growing distance but still landing like a sucker punch. As Davenport exits the bar, his phone buzzes with a text from his daughter Rebecca. Dad, need to talk about Mom. Call when you can. He grimaces and pockets the phone without responding. The family drama will have to wait. Right now, he has a plane to fly. James Wilson remains absorbed in his work, unaware of the pilot's departure or the role this man will soon play in his life. He's reviewing efficiency reports, his mind already shifting from proud father to master sergeant, that compartmentalization being another skill honed through years of military service. Nearby, other passengers for Flight 2317 begin gathering at Gate C-14. Among them is Marion Thornton, 73, traveling to Atlanta to meet her first great-grandchild. She settles her substantial frame into a seat near the gate desk, her knitting needles already clicking rhythmically as she works on a pale blue baby blanket. Beside her, Thomas Abernathy, 67, a retired high school history teacher headed to a Civil War reenactment conference, reads a well-worn biography of Ulysses S. Grant. Across the waiting area, Zoe Chen scrolls through TikTok, periodically glancing up to People Watch. College freshman returning home for summer break, she's exhausted from finals and eager to sleep in her own bed again. Her parents, first-generation immigrants who worked relentlessly to give her opportunities they never had, will be waiting at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson with her favorite homemade dumplings. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin boarding Flight 2317 to Atlanta in approximately 15 minutes, announces the gate agent, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. We'll start with our first-class passengers, active military personnel, and those needing special assistance. James closes his laptop, drains the last of his now-cold coffee, and gathers his belongings. As he approaches the gate, he doesn't notice the sidelong glances his uniform attracts, some respectful, others curious, a few wary. America's relationship with its military has always been complicated, perhaps never more so than now. Captain Davenport emerges from the jetway after completing his pre-flight checks. He nods curtly to the gate agents and scans the waiting area, mentally cataloging the passengers who will soon be his responsibility. His gaze passes over James without special notice before he returns to the cockpit, where First Officer Sandra Payton is already running through the flight checklist. Beautiful day for flying, Rich, she comments, glancing up from the controls. At 34, Sandra represents the new generation of pilots, technically proficient, professionally impeccable, and far more diverse than Richard's contemporaries. Clear skies all the way to Atlanta. Let's hope it stays that way, Richard responds, settling into his seat with the comfortable familiarity of thousands of previous flights. He doesn't mention the whiskey, and Sandra, who has flown with him enough times to recognize the faint scent, doesn't ask. Every crew has its unspoken accommodations. The boarding process begins smoothly. James Wilson is among the first to board, nodding politely to the flight attendants as he makes his way down the aisle to seat 14A. Not first class, despite Alina's prediction, but a window seat in Economy Plus that at least offers extra legroom for his 6'1" frame. As passengers continue boarding, the usual minor dramas of air travel unfold. The search for overhead bin space, the negotiation of armrests, the silent calculations of bathroom proximity. James stows his carry-on and settles in, removing his service cap and placing it carefully on the empty middle seat beside him. Marion Thornton boards next, moving slowly down the aisle with the assistance of a flight attendant. She smiles warmly at James as she passes, the kind of automatic respect her generation often shows to military personnel. "Thank you for your service, young man," she says, patting his shoulder with a plump, age-spotted hand. "Thank you, ma'am," James responds automatically, returning her smile. These brief interactions have become routine over his decades in uniform, sometimes sincere, sometimes performative, but always part of the unspoken contract between those who serve and those in whose name that service is rendered. More passengers file in. Thomas Abernathy takes his seat across the aisle, nodding politely to James before returning to his book. Zoe Chen appears, struggling to manage her overstuffed backpack and a pillow shaped like a panda. She's assigned to the aisle seat in James's row, but pauses awkwardly in the aisle, clearly hoping to avoid the middle position. "Excuse me," she says hesitantly. "I'm in 14C, but I get really anxious in the middle seat. Would you mind if I sat by the window instead?" James considers for a moment, then shakes his head with a gentle smile. "I'm sorry, but I specifically booked the window. I find it helps with my back on longer flights." This isn't entirely true. He simply prefers the window, but it feels like a more acceptable reason than simple preference. "Oh, sure, no problem," Zoe mumbles, disappointment evident as she slides past him to the middle seat, her backpack knocking against the seats as she goes. "Here, let me help," James offers, standing to give her more room. "That's quite a backpack. 4 textbooks I couldn't sell back," she explains with a rueful smile. "Plus my laptop and basically my entire life." The moment passes, one of countless small interactions that occur on every flight. Neither James nor Zoe realizes that this minor exchange has been observed and misinterpreted by a flight attendant standing at the front of the cabin, who will later report to Captain Davenport that she witnessed the uniformed passenger being confrontational with a young female passenger. The final travelers board, overhead bins are secured, and the cabin door is closed. The lead flight attendant begins the safety demonstration as the aircraft pushes back from the gate. In the cockpit, Richard and Sandra complete their final checks, communicating with ground control as they taxi toward the runway. Flight 2317 lifts off smoothly, climbing through scattered clouds into the clear blue beyond. As the seat belt sign dings off, passengers begin to settle into flight routine. Headphones emerge, screens illuminate, conversations quiet to murmurs. James gazes out the window at the receding Philadelphia landscape, thinking of Alina and the life she's building. Pride swells in his chest, tempered by the bittersweet knowledge that his role in her daily life continues to diminish. It's the natural order of things, but understanding doesn't make it easier. Beside him, Zoe has already fallen asleep, her head nodding dangerously close to his shoulder. James carefully adjusts his position to give her more space, remembering Alina at that age, exhausted from the intensity of college life, capable of falling asleep anywhere in seconds. 20 minutes into the flight, the first ripple of what will become a tidal wave begins. A passenger in row 12, Michael Brennan, 48, management consultant returning from a client meeting, signals for a flight attendant. "Excuse me," he says when Heather Davis approaches. "I ordered a scotch 10 minutes ago from the other attendant, but it hasn't arrived." "I'm sorry about that, sir. I'll check on it right away," Heather responds professionally, though her patience is already wearing thin. This flight is short-staffed, with one attendant having called in sick, leaving 3 to manage a full aircraft. As Heather moves toward the galley, Brennan mutters audibly, "Typical. Service gets worse every damn flight." The comment, though not directed at her, reaches James's ears. He glances up briefly before returning his attention to the landscape below, but the moment registers in his consciousness, another small pebble that will contribute to the landslide. In the galley, Heather discovers the drink cart is missing several mini bottles of scotch that should have been restocked. She informs her colleague, Jessica Torres, who sighs in frustration. "We're short on everything today," Jessica says. "The catering team was running behind. Tell him we can offer bourbon or vodka instead. When this substitution is proposed to Brennan, his reaction is disproportionate. You've got to be kidding me, he says loudly. I paid for business class and you can't even provide the basic drink I ordered. Jessica intervenes, her voice deliberately calm. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We're doing our best with limited supplies today. Your best isn't good enough, Brennan retorts. This is why I usually fly Delta. The exchange draws attention from surrounding passengers. Thomas Abernathy glances up from his book with a frown. Marion Thornton, a few rows ahead, turns to look disapprovingly over her reading glasses. And James, whose military career has instilled both respect for authority and a deep discomfort with public confrontation, shifts uncomfortably in his seat. As Jessica attempts to defuse the situation, Brennan's voice continues to rise. I want to speak to the captain. This is ridiculous. The captain is flying the plane, sir, Jessica replies, her professional veneer beginning to crack. I'm the lead flight attendant, and I'm telling you we don't have scotch available on this flight. Then what am I supposed to drink? Brennan demands. Before Jessica can respond, a voice from across the aisle interjects. For God's sake, man, take the bourbon and be grateful. Thomas Abernathy's teacher's voice carries the authority of decades in classrooms. These people are doing their jobs under difficult circumstances. Brennan turns, his face flushing. Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you. Sir, Jessica says firmly to Brennan, I need you to lower your voice. If you continue to disrupt the cabin, I'll have to inform the captain. At the word captain, Brennan seems to reconsider his approach. Fine, bourbon then, but I expect this to be comped. Jessica nods tightly and returns to the galley. As she prepares the drink, she murmurs to Heather, this flight is already a nightmare. Rich is going to blow a gasket if this keeps up. Rich has been blowing gaskets over nothing lately, Heather responds quietly. Ever since Linda left. Don't go there, Jessica warns. Just help me get through the next hour without incident. But the tension Brennan has introduced into the cabin doesn't dissipate. Instead, it spreads like an invisible gas, altering the atmosphere molecule by molecule. Other passengers, witnessing the exchange, begin to watch the flight attendants more critically, mentally cataloging perceived deficiencies in service. The mood shifts subtly but unmistakably. In row 14, James continues gazing out the window, now watching the patterns of farmland and forest passing below, trying to ignore the lingering discomfort from the nearby confrontation. Beside him, Zoe has awakened, pulled from sleep by the disturbance. What did I miss? She asks, yawning and adjusting her position. Just someone unhappy about the drink selection, James replies with a small smile. Nothing important. Zoe nods, then hesitates before asking, have you been in the military a long time? You seem too young to be so. High-ranking. She gestures vaguely at his uniform. James chuckles. I'm 54, hardly a spring chicken, but thank you for the compliment. I've served 22 years. Wow, Zoe says, genuinely impressed. My uncle was in the army for a while. He never talks about it, though. Some don't, James acknowledges. Everyone processes their service differently. Were you ever like in combat? Zoe asks, then immediately backpedals. Sorry, that's probably really personal. My mom says I ask too many questions. It's all right, James assures her. Yes, I've seen combat, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Zoe's eyes widen. That's intense. Were you scared? James considers his answer carefully. Anyone who says they're never scared in a war zone is either lying or foolish. The key is learning to function despite the fear. Their conversation continues, James answering Zoe's questions with patience and occasional humor. It's a dialogue reminiscent of many he's had before, civilians curious about military experience, trying to bridge the gap between their world and his. James doesn't mind. In fact, he values these exchanges. Each one is an opportunity to humanize the uniform, to remind himself and others that beneath the ribbons and insignia are ordinary people doing extraordinary jobs. What neither realizes is that their interaction is being observed and again misinterpreted. Heather Davis, passing through the cabin with the drink cart, notices the animated conversation between the older black man in uniform and the young Asian woman. Something about their body language, Zoe leaning in eagerly, James gesturing as he explains something, triggers a protective instinct in Heather, colored by unconscious biases she would vehemently deny possessing. As Heather returns to the galley, she mentions casually to Jessica, that military guy in 14A seems to be getting pretty friendly with the college girl next to him. She looks uncomfortable. Jessica glances down the aisle. What she sees is a respectful conversation between 2 passengers, nothing inappropriate or concerning. But Heather's framing colors her perception just enough to file the observation away as potentially problematic. Keep an eye on it, she says. Let me know if anything seems off. This exchange, seemingly insignificant, adds another pebble to the growing pile. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Richard Davenport and First Officer Sandra Peyton are navigating through a patch of light turbulence. The aircraft bounces slightly, causing the seatbelt sign to illuminate automatically. "Nothing serious," Sandra comments, adjusting their altitude slightly. "Just some unstable air masses over the mountains." Richard nods, his attention on the instruments. The whiskey he consumed earlier has left him with a slight headache, exacerbating his already sour mood. The text from his daughter weighs on him, another conversation about his failing marriage that he's not ready to have. The cabin intercom buzzes. Richard answers, cockpit. "Captain, it's Jessica. We had a minor situation with a passenger in business class. Nothing serious, but he was quite disruptive about not getting scotch." Richard sighs audibly. "Do we need to have him met by security in Atlanta?" "No, he settled down. I just wanted to keep you informed." "Anything else I should know?" Richard asks, his tone making it clear he's hoping the answer is no. Jessica hesitates, then adds, "Actually, Heather mentioned there might be a situation developing in row 14. A military passenger possibly making a young female passenger uncomfortable. We're keeping an eye on it." This information, delivered without context or verification, lands differently with Richard than it might have on another day. His own daughter is roughly the same age as many college students, and the thought of her being made uncomfortable by an older man triggers an immediate protective response. "Let me know immediately if it escalates," he instructs. "I won't tolerate any harassment on my aircraft." "Yes, Captain," Jessica responds before ending the call. Sandra gives Richard a questioning look. "Problems in the cabin?" "Nothing we can't handle," he replies tersely. "Just the usual passenger drama." The turbulence increases slightly, drawing their professional attention back to flying the aircraft. But the seed has been planted in Richard's mind, a mischaracterization of James Wilson that will grow roots and branches in the fertile soil of stress, bias, and misunderstanding. Back in the cabin, the seatbelt sign prompts James and Zoe to pause their conversation. James reaches for the novel in his seat pocket, a well-worn copy of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man that he's been rereading periodically since college. The choice is deliberate. Each reading at different stages of life reveals new layers of meaning, new reflections on visibility, identity, and America's complex racial landscape. Zoe notices the title. "Oh, I read that for my American literature class last semester," she says. "It was intense. My professor said it's still relevant today, which is kind of depressing when you think about it." James smiles slightly. "Some books remain relevant because they speak to something fundamental about human experience. The contexts change, but the core truths persist." "Do you think things have improved since Ellison wrote it?" Zoe asks, genuinely curious about his perspective. James considers his answer carefully. "Yes and no. The explicit barriers have largely fallen, but the invisible ones can be just as powerful. I've commanded units with hundreds of personnel of all backgrounds, achieved a rank my grandfather couldn't have dreamed of, and still get followed in department stores occasionally." Zoe nods thoughtfully. "My parents came from China in the 90s. They say America gave them opportunities they never could have had at home, but they still get people speaking extra slowly to them in English, even though they've been here for decades. Progress isn't linear," James acknowledges, "and it's never complete." Their conversation continues, touching on family, education, and Zoe's ambitions in computer science. James shares stories about Alina's engineering journey, offering encouragement about women in STEM fields. It's the kind of cross-generational, cross-cultural exchange that represents America at its best: open, thoughtful, mutually respectful. But perception and reality continue to diverge. Heather, passing through the cabin again, sees only an older man continuing to engage with a young woman during turbulence when conversations typically pause. The flight attendant's concern deepens, colored by protective instincts that are admirable in intention but potentially dangerous in application. In the galley, she reports to Jessica, "That situation in row 14 is ongoing. Should I say something?" Jessica peers down the aisle. From her vantage point, she can see James and Zoe engaged in what appears to be a perfectly normal conversation. But Heather's persistent concern plants a seed of doubt. "Let's wait," Jessica decides. "If she signals for help or seems distressed, we'll intervene." The turbulence subsides, and the seatbelt sign turns off with a gentle ding. The cabin settles back into the rhythm of flight. Drink service continues, passengers visit the lavatories, and the mundane logistics of air travel proceed without incident. Until they don't. 35 minutes into the flight, the first truly significant disruption occurs. Michael Brennan, having consumed his bourbon too quickly on an empty stomach, becomes increasingly belligerent. When Jessica refuses his request for a second drink, citing his visible intoxication, he rises from his seat despite the illuminated seat belt sign. "This is ridiculous," he announces loudly. "I'm going to speak to the captain myself." Jessica blocks his path to the cockpit. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately. The captain is flying the aircraft and cannot be disturbed." Brennan attempts to push past her, his movements unsteady. "Get out of my way." "I paid good money for this flight." The confrontation quickly escalates. Other passengers watch with a mixture of alarm and voyeuristic interest, the unfolding drama providing an unexpected break in the monotony of air travel. Thomas Abernathy half rises from his seat, clearly prepared to intervene if the situation becomes physical. But it's James Wilson who responds most decisively. Without hesitation, he unfastens his seat belt and moves into the aisle, his presence immediately commanding attention. He doesn't touch Brennan but positions himself beside Jessica, a clear statement of support. "Sir," James says, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of command, "the flight attendant has asked you to return to your seat. I strongly suggest you comply." Brennan turns, momentarily startled by the uniformed figure beside him. For a tense moment, it seems he might escalate further, but something in James's steady gaze causes him to reconsider. With a muttered obscenity, he returns to his seat, the confrontation diffused as quickly as it began. "Thank you, sir," Jessica says to James, genuine gratitude in her voice. James nods. "Just doing my part to keep the peace." He returns to his seat, the entire incident having lasted less than a minute. The cabin gradually returns to normal, but the dynamics have shifted once again. Most passengers view James's intervention favorably, a responsible authority figure stepping in when needed. But perception is never universal. In the galley, Heather whispers to Jessica, "Did you see that? He just inserted himself into a security situation without being asked. That's not appropriate. We're trained to handle passenger conflicts." Jessica frowns. "He helped defuse a potentially dangerous situation. I'm grateful." "Still," Heather persists, "there's something off about him. First, the weird intensity with the young girl now playing hero. I think we should inform the captain." Jessica hesitates, torn between her positive impression of James's assistance and Heather's persistent concerns. Finally, professional caution wins out. "I'll let Rich know what happened, including the intervention." When Jessica contacts the cockpit again, she provides a factual account of the incident with Brennan. But human communication is never purely factual. Tone, emphasis, and word choice inevitably color the narrative. And when she mentions James's role, describing him as the military passenger who stepped in without being asked, the framing subtly transforms a helpful action into a potentially problematic one. Captain Richard Davenport processes this information through multiple filters: his professional responsibility for flight safety, his personal stress, the earlier vague report about potential harassment, and now this new incident involving the same passenger. In his mind, a pattern is forming. A military passenger who might be bothering a young woman and is now involving himself in security matters. "Is this passenger becoming a problem?" Richard asks directly. Jessica, caught off guard by the question, hesitates. "I wouldn't say a problem exactly, just notable." "Keep me informed," Richard instructs. "If his behavior continues to stand out, I'll need to make a decision before we land." This conversation plants the final seed that will bloom into catastrophe. In Richard's mind, James Wilson has transformed from an ordinary passenger to a potential security concern, all without James having done anything truly inappropriate. In row 14, entirely unaware of the narrative being constructed around him, James returns to his book. Beside him, Zoe has put on headphones and is watching a movie on her tablet. The ordinary tranquility of their row stands in stark contrast to the brewing storm. 50 minutes into the 90-minute flight, the aircraft begins its initial descent toward Atlanta. The seatbelt sign illuminates, and the lead flight attendant announces preparation for landing. Passengers stow tray tables, return seats to upright positions, and power down larger electronic devices, the familiar choreography of arrival. In the cockpit, Richard and Sandra complete their descent checklist, communicating with Atlanta approach control as they navigate through scattered clouds. Everything is proceeding normally, professionally, according to the thousands of procedures and protocols that keep commercial aviation remarkably safe. But in Richard's mind, an abnormal process is unfolding, a cascade of misperceptions, misinterpretations, and misjudgments that is leading him toward a disastrous decision. The whiskey consumed before flight, the stress of his collapsing marriage, the text from his daughter, the reports from the cabin, all swirl together into a toxic brew of impaired judgment. As the aircraft descends through 10,000 feet, Richard makes a decision that will change many lives. "Sandra, take the controls for a moment," he says, unbuckling his harness. "I need to address a situation in the cabin." Sandra looks at him in surprise. "Now, we're in active descent. It'll just take a minute. I need to see this passenger for myself before we land." "Rich, this isn't standard procedure," Sandra protests. "Whatever it is can wait until we're on the ground." "I'm the captain," Richard responds firmly. "I'll decide what can wait." Before Sandra can argue further, Richard exits the cockpit, securing the door behind him. In the cabin, his appearance causes immediate attention. It's unusual for the captain to emerge during descent, and passengers sense something significant is occurring. Richard moves purposefully down the aisle until he reaches row 14. James Wilson glances up from his book, momentarily confused by the captain's presence beside his seat. "Sir," Richard says, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "I need to speak with you." James closes his book and gives the captain his full attention. "Of course. What can I do for you, Captain?" Richard is momentarily thrown by James's calm, respectful response. It doesn't match the problematic character he's constructed in his mind. But he's committed now, standing in the aisle with the eyes of passengers upon him. "I've received multiple reports about your behavior during this flight," Richard says, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cabin. "Interactions with other passengers that have raised concerns." James's expression shifts from confusion to disbelief. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. What concerns?" "Sir, I need you to deplane immediately." The words slice through the cabin like a knife, silencing the casual chatter of passengers settling in for landing. Captain Richard Davenport stands rigid in the aisle, his face taut with barely contained anger as he points toward the exit. "As soon as we land, you will be the first to exit." "Excuse me?" James manages, his voice steady despite the shock rippling through him. The gold insignia on his uniform catches the overhead light, a stark reminder of his decades of service to the same country whose flag is emblazoned on the pilot's lapel. "You heard me. I won't repeat myself." The captain's voice rises just enough for the surrounding passengers to hear every syllable. "Either you agree to deplane first, or I'll have security remove you." A woman 3 rows back gasps audibly. Smartphones emerge from pockets and purses, their cameras already recording. 19-year-old Zoe Chen, sitting right beside James, begins a live stream with trembling fingers. "I'm on flight 2317 to Atlanta, and you guys won't believe what's happening right now," she whispers urgently into her phone. "The pilot is trying to kick a black military officer off the plane for absolutely no reason." But the real shock comes moments later, when Captain Davenport's next words are captured in high-definition clarity on dozens of devices. "Your kind of disrespect has no place on my aircraft." "Your kind." 2 words that ignite an instantaneous firestorm throughout the cabin. Passengers exchange glances of shock and disbelief. Thomas Abernathy stands up from his seat across the aisle, his historian's mind immediately grasping the significance of the moment. "Captain," he says firmly, "I've been seated across from this gentleman for the entire flight. He has been nothing but courteous and helpful. In fact, he assisted your flight attendant during a disturbance earlier." There is absolutely no basis for this action. Richard turns, surprised by the intervention. "Sir, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," Marion Thornton calls from her seat, her grandmother's voice carrying moral authority. "We all witnessed what this young man did to help your crew. What exactly are you accusing him of?" Richard finds himself suddenly on the defensive, surrounded by questioning faces and recording devices. This isn't how he expected this confrontation to play out. In his mind, he was addressing a problem passenger, exercising his authority as captain to ensure the safety and comfort of all aboard. Instead, he's facing what feels like a mutiny. In the cockpit, Sandra Payton has been monitoring the exchange through the cabin intercom, growing increasingly alarmed. The aircraft is still descending, approaching pattern altitude, and her captain is in the cabin creating a disturbance rather than flying the plane. She makes a rapid decision and contacts Atlanta Control. "Atlanta approach, Delta 2317 requesting priority handling. We have a situation on board." In row 14, James Wilson remains outwardly composed despite the internal earthquake of emotions, shock, confusion, humiliation, and the familiar, exhausting weight of being judged by his skin rather than his character or actions. He's experienced versions of this moment throughout his life and military career, though rarely so public or extreme. "Captain," he says evenly, "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding. I've done nothing to warrant this treatment." The decision has been made, Richard insists, though his certainty is visibly wavering in the face of passenger support for James. Security will meet the aircraft. Zoe, still live streaming, finds her voice. This is so wrong, she says, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've been sitting next to him the whole flight. He's been completely appropriate and even helped when that drunk businessman was causing problems. Richard's face flushes darker. The situation is spiraling beyond his control. More passengers are standing now, phones recording, voices rising in protest. The carefully maintained hierarchy of the aircraft cabin, with the captain at its apex, is dissolving before his eyes. Jessica Torres pushes through the crowd, alarm evident on her face. Captain, we need you back in the cockpit immediately. We're on final approach. This reminder of his primary responsibility, the safe operation of the aircraft, finally breaks through Richard's fixation. With a last glare at James, he turns and moves quickly back toward the cockpit, leaving chaos in his wake. As Richard disappears behind the cockpit door, an extraordinary thing happens. Thomas Abernathy rises again and addresses the cabin at large, his teacher's voice cutting through the confused babble. Ladies and gentlemen, he says, we have just witnessed something unconscionable. I suggest we not let it pass without consequence. I propose that upon landing, none of us deplane until this situation is properly addressed by airline management. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the cabin. Marion Thornton raises her hand like a student in class. I second that motion, she says firmly, her voice carrying the weight of decades of civil rights activism that began with marches in the 1960s. The CEO needs to hear about this directly, calls another passenger, a business executive in row 7. This can't be brushed under the rug. James watches this spontaneous uprising with complex emotions. Part of him is deeply moved by the strangers rallying to his defense. Another part wishes he could simply disappear, avoid the spectacle, the exposure, the exhausting role of unwilling symbol in America's ongoing racial drama. Zoe turns to him, still streaming. Is it okay if I keep recording? People need to see this. James hesitates, then nods. Truth should be witnessed, he says quietly, but this isn't just about me. I know, Zoe responds with surprising insight. It's about all of us, what kind of country we want to be. In the cockpit, Richard straps back into his seat, taking control of the aircraft from Sandra for the final approach. His hands are steady on the controls, years of training overriding his emotional turmoil, but his mind is in chaos. What happened back there? Sandra asks, her voice tight with controlled anger. You left the flight deck during active descent to confront a passenger. I had reason to believe he was a security concern, Richard responds defensively. Based on what? Because from what I could hear, the passengers seem to have a very different perspective. Richard doesn't answer, focusing instead on the approach, the familiar sequence of altitude, speed, and heading adjustments that will bring the aircraft safely to the ground. But for perhaps the first time in his distinguished career, Captain Richard Davenport is afraid, not of flying, but of what awaits him when the wheels touch down. Flight 2317 lands smoothly at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport at 5:47 p.m., taxiing toward Gate B14 where representatives from airline management are already waiting, alerted by Sandra's cryptic request for priority handling and subsequent, more detailed communication with ground control. As the aircraft parks and the engines spool down, Jessica makes an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We have a special situation that requires attention before deplaning can begin. In row 14, James Wilson sits quietly, his military bearing providing external composure while internally he processes the implications of what has occurred. Beside him, Zoe continues her live stream, now being watched by over 20,000 viewers as the story spreads across social media with the speed only digital outrage can achieve. The plane has landed, she narrates softly, but no one is leaving until justice is served. The captain tried to remove this decorated Air Force officer for absolutely no reason, using language that clearly had racial implications. Throughout the cabin, an extraordinary solidarity has formed among previously disconnected strangers. Passengers from different backgrounds, ages, and political perspectives have united around a shared sense of witnessed injustice. Thomas Abernathy has moved to stand in the aisle near James, a self-appointed advocate. Marion Thornton has collected signatures on a napkin, a petition demanding immediate action from airline leadership. In the cockpit, Richard and Sandra complete the shutdown checklist in tense silence. As Richard reaches for the cabin door release, Sandra places a hand on his arm. Rich, she says quietly, whatever happens next, remember you have a family who loves you. Don't let pride make this worse than it already is. Richard stares at her for a long moment. then nods almost imperceptibly before opening the door. Outside, the scene is unprecedented. Instead of the usual ground crew, a group of airline executives in business attire waits on the jet bridge. Among them is Gerald Harrington, the airline's CEO, who happened to be in Atlanta for a conference and was contacted directly when the scope of the unfolding PR disaster became clear. As Richard emerges from the cockpit, a flight attendant hands him the intercom handset. "The passengers are demanding to speak with management before anyone deplanes," she explains. Richard takes the handset, his face ashen. For the first time, the full consequences of his actions are becoming clear to him. Not just professional consequences, though those will be severe, but the human impact of his misjudgment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, "I understand there are concerns about my earlier actions. Representatives from airline management are here to address the situation." "We want the CEO," calls a voice from the back. "Nothing less." Gerald Harrington steps aboard, moving to stand beside Richard. At 62, Harrington has navigated numerous corporate crises during his career, but none quite like this. A situation unfolding in real time across social media, with racial overtones that threaten not just the airline's reputation, but its fundamental relationship with customers and employees. "Good evening," Harrington says into the handset, his voice calm and measured. "I'm Gerald Harrington, CEO of the airline. I understand there's been a deeply concerning incident on this flight, and I'm here personally to address it." "Have you seen the video?" someone calls out. Harrington nods. "I've been briefed on the situation and shown clips that are already circulating online. First, let me say clearly that what I've seen does not reflect the values or policies of our airline. Now I'd like to speak directly with the passenger involved." All eyes turn to James Wilson, who remains seated, his expression carefully neutral. The CEO moves down the aisle, followed by Richard, who seems to have aged years and minutes. When Harrington reaches row 14, he addresses James directly. "Master Sergeant, on behalf of the entire airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for what occurred today. There is no excuse for the treatment you received, and I assure you there will be a full investigation with appropriate consequences." James meets his gaze steadily. "Mr. Harrington, I appreciate your presence and your words, but this situation reflects something far bigger than one incident or one airline. I've spent my adult life in uniform, defending a nation that still too often judges people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character." A hush falls over the cabin as James continues, his voice gaining strength. "What happened today happens to people who look like me every day, though usually without cameras rolling and witnesses willing to speak up. So while I accept your apology, I'm more interested in knowing what actions will follow your words." Harrington, to his credit, doesn't flinch from the challenge. "You're absolutely right, Master Sergeant. Words without action are meaningless. So let me be specific. Captain Davenport is suspended effective immediately pending investigation. I'm establishing a review of our training protocols around bias and discrimination, with input from external experts and our own diverse employee groups. And I'd like to invite you if you're willing to be part of that process." Throughout the cabin, passengers listen intently, many still recording. The scene has transformed from a potential riot to something approaching a town hall, raw, unscripted democracy at 30,000 feet. Richard Davenport, standing beside Harrington, finally speaks. "Master Sergeant Wilson," he says, his voice strained but determined, "I owe you a personal apology as well. My actions were inexcusable. I allowed stress, misunderstanding, and I must admit my own unconscious biases to cloud my judgment. There's no justification for how I treated you." A complicated silence follows this admission. Apologies cannot erase harm, yet they can be the first step toward healing, if followed by genuine change. James studies Richard's face, seeing beyond the captain's epaulets to the flawed, struggling human beneath. "Captain Davenport," James finally responds, "I accept your apology. I've commanded enough people to know that everyone makes mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in never failing, but in how they respond to failure." This exchange, captured on dozens of phones, will be viewed millions of times in the coming days, analyzed, dissected, praised, and criticized from across the political spectrum. But in this moment, it represents something rare in American public life, an authentic reckoning with mistake and harm without the mediation of publicists or legal teams. Thomas Abernathy breaks the silence that follows. "Mr. Harrington, we appreciate your swift response and presence. But the passengers of this flight would like to formally request that Master Sergeant Wilson be appropriately compensated for this experience, and that Captain Davenport undergo significant retraining before returning to duty, if he returns at all." Harrington nods. Those are reasonable requests. Master Sergeant Wilson, I'd like to speak with you privately about making this right. As for Captain Davenport's future, that will depend on the results of our investigation and his willingness to engage in the necessary process of education and reflection. Marion Thornton speaks up from her seat. Young man, she says, addressing James with the familiar warmth of a grandmother, I marched with Dr. King in Selma. I've seen this country change and change again. What happened today shows both how far we've come, that all these good people stood up for you, and how far we still have to go. James nods respectfully to her. Yes, ma'am, progress isn't linear and it's never complete. Zoe, still streaming, captures this exchange before turning the camera back to herself. So that's where we are now, everyone. The CEO is here, the captain has apologized, and it seems like there might actually be some accountability. This is what happens when people stand together against injustice. Her livestream counter shows over 100,000 viewers now, with comments flooding in faster than anyone could possibly read. The intimate drama of Flight 2317 has become a national moment, a microcosm of America's ongoing struggle with its racial history and present. Gerald Harrington addresses the cabin again. I want to thank all of you for your patience and for standing up for what's right. You're now free to deplane, though we'll need a few minutes to prepare the jet bridge. Our ground staff will be assisting with any connecting flights that may have been affected by this delay. As passengers begin gathering their belongings, a subtle but significant shift occurs in the cabin's social dynamics. Strangers who hours ago would have deplaned without a word exchange contact information, promise to follow up, share experiences. Thomas Abernathy and Marion Thornton coordinate to ensure the passenger petition reaches appropriate authorities. A network forms bound by shared witness and purpose. James remains seated, allowing others to deplane first, still processing the emotional whiplash of the past hour. Zoe lingers beside him, having ended her live stream but clearly reluctant to leave. I should thank you, James tells her. Your quick thinking with that live stream probably changed how this all played out. Zoe shrugs, suddenly shy. Anyone would have done it. It was so obviously wrong. No, James says gently. History suggests that's not true. Standing up has always been the exception, not the rule. You should be proud. As the cabin gradually empties, Gerald Harrington returns to James's row. Master Sergeant, if you're willing, I'd like to continue our conversation privately. My office here at the airport would be more comfortable. James nods and stands, gathering his belongings. As he moves toward the exit, flight attendant Jessica Torres steps forward. Sir, she says, her voice thick with emotion, I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. My report to the captain was factual. You helped us with that difficult passenger. I don't know how it got so twisted. James meets her gaze. Miscommunication happens. What matters is what we do next. As James exits the aircraft, followed by Harrington, he passes Richard Davenport standing alone in the galley, his future as uncertain as the country whose divisions have been laid bare on his aircraft today. Outside on the concourse, normal airport life continues. Announcements echo, travelers rush to connections, reunions unfold at arrival gates. But for those departing Flight 2317, something has changed. They carry with them not just luggage, but a shared experience that has forced confrontation with uncomfortable truths about American society, and perhaps, for some, a new commitment to addressing them. 3 days later, James Wilson sits in his office at the Air Force Base, reviewing the personnel files that were interrupted by his fateful Philadelphia trip. His phone buzzes with yet another media request, CNN this time wanting him to appear on a panel discussion about bias in commercial aviation. He declines politely, as he has with all previous requests. His door opens, and Senior Airman Rodriguez appears. Sorry to interrupt, Master Sergeant, but you should probably see this. She hands him a tablet open to a news site. The headline reads, Airline CEO announces major initiatives ON bias training. Captain Davenport requests early retirement. James scans the article quickly. Gerald Harrington has announced a comprehensive overhaul of the airline's approach to diversity and inclusion, including mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, revisions to security protocols to prevent profiling, and the establishment of a passenger bill of rights. More surprising is the statement from Richard Davenport, who has chosen early retirement rather than suspension. My actions on Flight 2317 revealed shortcomings in my judgment that I must acknowledge and address. While I've proudly served as a pilot for over 30 years, this incident has shown me that I have more to learn about the country and people I've been serving. I will be using this time to educate myself and to reflect on how I can contribute positively to a more just society. James sets down the tablet, his feelings mixed. There's satisfaction in seeing concrete action, yet also awareness that one incident, however high profile, doesn't change the underlying realities that made it possible. His phone buzzes again, a text from Alina. "Dad, you're trending again. Zoe's livestream just hit 5 million views. Call me when you can." James smiles slightly. His daughter has been his rock through this media storm, fiercely protective yet also helping him see the larger significance of what happened. "Not just about you," she had said, echoing Zoe's words on the plane. "About what kind of country we want to be." As he prepares to return to his work, James reflects on the strange, unwanted journey from anonymous military officer to reluctant symbol in America's ongoing conversation about race. He thinks of Marion Thornton, who marched in Selma, of Thomas Abernathy, teaching history to generation after generation, of Zoe Chen using new tools to document old injustices, of Richard Davenport, whose mistake became a mirror for a nation still struggling to see itself clearly. Progress isn't linear, and it's never complete. But sometimes, in the crucible of unexpected moments, it inches forward, propelled not by grand gestures or eloquent speeches, but by ordinary people making the extraordinary choice to stand for what's right, even when it would be easier to remain seated, silent, and complicit. Outside James's window, a formation of aircraft traces perfect lines across the summer sky, a reminder of what humans can achieve when working in harmony, following protocols designed for the common good. On the ground below, the more complex human journey continues, imperfect, unfinished, yet still reaching for those same clear skies. If you found this story valuable, please consider subscribing to support more content like this. Your engagement helps us continue producing compelling narratives that explore important social issues through immersive storytelling. What did you think about how this situation was handled? Have you witnessed similar incidents in your own experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation about creating a more just and understanding society.